Hello. In the last few months, COVID-19 has upended higher education, transforming how we teach and study, how research is conducted, even the very rhythms of campus life. But perhaps few other parts of the academic enterprise has been as hard hit as international education. Borders are closed, there's little travel, so study abroad and foreign exchange programs have largely shuttered. Many international students are pursuing this semester and perhaps even more semesters online in a field where, for better or for worse, international mobility is a key metric. The challenges really could be existential. Hi, I'm Karen Fisher. I've been writing about international education for more than a decade, and welcome to today's event. We're going to talk about the future of international education, both how it is being shaped by COVID and what it might look in the long term. I'll be joined by a stellar panel, and I look forward to hearing from our audience as well. So first, let me give you a few housekeeping details. Please send your questions or your comments to the Q&A box, post them there. For security reasons, we will be screening them before they go live, so please have patience with us. And I plan to include your questions in the second half of the panel. As a reminder, this panel session is being recorded, and we'll send an email with a link to the on-demand version in a few business days. And that email will also include some resources that are shared in today's session. If you're having any technical issues, please send an email to connect@chronicle.com. That's connect@chronicle.com. And a staff person there will help you with any issues you're having. I want to thank the sponsor of today's broadcast, Keystone Academic Solutions. We really appreciate their support. Without them, we would not be able to have this conversation or conversations like this with our audience. I also want to introduce my colleague, Liz McMillan, who's an editor at the Chronicle. And about halfway through the broadcast, we'll be pausing for Liz to do a short interview with Eric Harrell of Keystone Academic Solutions. And after that, we'll be returning to our panel discussion. So now let me get to the heart of things and let me introduce our panel. I'm really appreciative that they've joined us for today's conversation. First, Harvey Charles, who's a professor of international education at the State University of New York at Albany. And Harvey is also a former president of the Association of International Education Administrators. Next, we have Stephanie Doscher, who's the Director of Global Learning Initiatives at Florida International University. Ahmad Ezzedine, Associate Vice President for Educational Outreach and International Programs at Wayne State University. And Cheryl Matherly, who's a Vice President and Vice Provost for International Affairs at Lehigh University. So I want to begin with you, Cheryl, if last to be introduced, first to get a question. I think in the spring, colleges were really in triage mode. They were really just responding to the emergency of the coronavirus. But now that the new semester is beginning, I'd be really curious if you could tell us a little bit about what the new normal is like for international education.
Well, I think that sort of assumes, Karen, that there is some kind of normal. I think everybody, all my colleagues here is the same thing. It's whatever happens that particular day. I think there's a lot of issues in this. I think one is that we're trying to figure out what it means to be trying to manage direct international programs in a place when we're doing so much of it virtually. Travel isn't going to really be a component to that. Trying to do some kind of forecasting or planning ahead when we don't really know what's going to be happening 2 or 3 months down the road, much less where we are on this. And trying to do this in the context of navigating the particular realities that are going on with our own campuses, independent of the issues of international engagement. And so it's really complicated. I think, in our case, what we're really focusing on is both these issues of how do we continue to support our international students, the few that are here in Bethlehem, but really those that are not here and that are trying to begin their first year studies or graduate studies remotely, that are stranded at home and were not able to return, trying to deal with those issues and support there. And the questions about then what will happen in the spring. And at the same time, still looking then at our undergraduate students who want to continue with their other kind of international learning programs and thinking about how do we then continue to learn from what we had to pivot and do really quickly in the spring to think about which one of those are programs that we really want to seed and continue to be invested in as we go forward. And so it's navigating complex situations with very limited information.
Mommy, Cheryl laid out a ton of different priorities, and I wonder for you at Wayne State, how are you prioritizing? Where are you putting your greatest emphasis this fall in dealing with all aspects of international education? Maybe you might be on mute. So I'm sure we missed part of a very good answer.
I will start again. If we had a quarter for every time we said, someone, you're on mute, right? We would be rich. All of us would be rich. The priority has been really on getting making sure that our students are safe and healthy and taken care of while they are here. If we had domestic students abroad, we had to bring them back home. And we've been managing through that, and that still remains our priority. Now we have a new academic year, so we're trying to make sure that we are onboarding our new students, those who made it to the country. Luckily for us, we've had a good number of them in the graduate program, so and moving from other universities in the US to Wayne State. So that has been simpler to manage than some of those who are still overseas. We have a few students also who are taking their classes remotely, new students and current students. So making sure they have what they need to really be successful, and they have the support and the access to the faculty, to the university resources that they need. So that's certainly a priority. But also we're doing all of this while preparing for the new recruiting season without any information that we can expect. So it's really a shot in the dark and in many cases. And also managing and navigating the financial realities that all of us are facing with our budgets and our university budgets, and how do we handle that, and what impact does it have on us? We're also, at least we are, and I'm sure many of us are also taking time to really focus on our employees and our staff and ensure they're okay through all of these transitions. Their world has been turned upside down as well, and they're worried about their jobs, and they're worried about their families, and they're worried about a variety of things. And how do we also make sure we give them the support? So that, it's been a very very interesting period. I think I speak probably for all of us. We've gotten a lot of skills in agile management. Seems to be the mode of operations for all of us for the last few months, and I think unfortunately it probably continue for a few more.
I mean, that's a really good point about you're trying to both manage in the immediate term, but also kind of look ahead to next semester and next year. And Stephanie, I wonder, what are the things that are keeping you up at night right now, and what are the things that are giving you indigestion thinking forward?
How did you know? Do you have a camera in my house? Yeah, I would say, in addition to the management issues that my colleagues have articulated so well, there are the leadership issues, right? So how do we sustain a vision for internationalization on our campuses and with our partners? How do we innovate that vision? What keeps me up at night a bit is grief, managing my own grief, letting go of my own vision of the future, and perhaps my mistaken vision of what reality was for myself and others in the past, and getting to some acceptance of this kind of hybrid reality that we are living in now and will be living in probably forevermore. So I feel that the sooner that I can move through my own grief process, the better able I will be to help faculty and my colleagues and students and research professors move through their process as well and re-envision how they will reach the same goals that we had before, which, when I think of internationalization, I don't think of it so much as an inward facing activity. And I don't think of it as so much a win activity, but a why activity. For me, internationalization is all about connecting the institution and the people within it with the world's knowledge exchange and production network. And so there are many, many ways we can do that. We can move minds and move ideas across borders without moving people. But still, it's the being in the presence of others. It's the smell of the foods and the sound of the music and the energy that we get when we are being in different places. The passion that brought all of us probably to this work is through travel. So how can we transform without travel? That means getting to an acceptance of a hybrid and a new kind of reality.
Harvey, I know you were a longtime SIO, and now you are not in that day-to-day management place. But I know that you've thought a lot about kind of those realities, and I wonder how much you think that COVID is kind of challenging, as Stephanie said, those fundamentals, those kind of expectations that the field had about itself and its mission and the goals for international education.
Absolutely. And I think in a lot of ways, what Stephanie has just described, I think captures the challenge really well for us, because what she discussed was really what is central to global learning. And I think what should be central to all of us as educators. Mobility, education abroad, is one strategy by which we achieve global learning. And, it has been used for a very long time. And I hope that we can continue to engage in education abroad. But fundamentally, I think that the challenge is global learning. And Stephanie actually describes this in a book that she and her colleagues recently published as a process that prepares students for active global citizenship by involving them in collaborative global problem solving as a central part of the college experience. And what this means is that in some ways we have to pivot a bit away from an almost exclusive focus on mobility to the curriculum, and what in fact can the curriculum do at home to help our students engage with the grand challenges that we face today. Arundhati Roy just published a book. It's called Azadi. And she talks about the pandemic as a portal. Basically a way of connecting the world that we have left behind to the world to which we're going. This world that we've left behind, we will never return to that world. And although I think none of us really can fully understand what this world that we're going to would look like in totality, my hunch is that this new world will create a much larger footprint for engagement with internationalization. If you look at what I have been referring to as the trifecta of catastrophe in this year, 2020. We're talking about the pandemic. We're talking about anti-racist protests. We're talking about economic devastation. All three of these are fundamentally global challenges. And all three of these are confronting us with the realities of our time. We've heard a lot about climate change, and we can actually look at the fires out west currently as yet another reminder. So it seems to me that the impetus increasingly is on us as educators to really advocate for a much larger footprint for student engagement in global learning. And of course, that can take a number of forms, and we can get to that later in the conversation.
Pick up on this because I think this is a really, really important idea, and it's where I think sort of the opportunity sits as we come out of this. That that when the discussion is framed simply one in terms of mobility, then what we're talking about is a section or a set of activities that are going to be shut down for some period of time to that, because it's all about the activity. But instead, I think what's really happening is what was always there, but it's really, I think, forcing international educators back to being really clear on the purpose for what the work is that we're doing. And I think Stephanie and Harvey really made really clear points to this. And I think any of us who work in higher ed are aware that the nature of the business has always been global, always been international. And we sit right on the edge of those issues now and see those in some really fundamental ways, kind of critical to the work that we're doing. And so in many ways, even that we're at a point in time that this work is even more important, but it's incumbent on us to be able to continue to keep that sort of front and center for why that's the case, being clear on the purpose, articulating the relationship to the mission of our respective institutions. All of that becomes really critical, because then that's what opens up then the kinds of work that Stephanie and Harvey are talking about, of pushing this out of just simply travel programs or body counts of students that we recruit in, but really being sort of fundamental to what the institution is. And I think that's actually where, you know, when I look at sort of what the bright spots are out of this, I would prefer, I can think of a lot of ways I'd rather have us gotten to this discussion than what's happened in the last 6 months. I think that this is a potential, I think this is a real turning point, and how we handle and how we discuss this here coming out of it, I think is really where that opportunity sits. And I actually share sort of much of the optimism that we hear, that I think that Harvey really talks about with it, by being successful pushing this back into other places at the institution.
Yeah, just to put a fine point on that, when it comes to resilience, because that's the word that we keep hearing about, internationalization, I think those who are focusing on learning are resilient. They are finding a way to keep people learning. Those who are focused on the business model are finding themselves susceptible to risk, vulnerable, highly vulnerable right now.
This is an interesting point, because in some ways, I mean, I not to date myself, but I mean, I've been covering this stuff for more than a decade. And many of these conversations are conversations that I heard from people, you know, when I was fresh to this beat. And so I wonder, I mean, how do you make a crisis? How do you find opportunity in crisis? I'm wondering, Ahmad, are you seeing ways to advocate effectively in the midst of all these things that are going on?
Absolutely, and I mean, I totally agree with my colleagues. I think this is a great opportunity, and I'm very optimistic, because I think the pandemic is making the case for us for why we need internationalization, and internationalization in all its aspects, and away from just focus on international enrollment or mobility. We all, you know, and move it more to global learning, and really the really meaningful international education that we all talk about and preach and have been talking about for a long time. We all also, I mean, and internationalization, I think this is also an opportunity, especially with the lack of travel now, an opportunity to really push on internationalization at home. We all brag about the diverse communities that we have surrounding our universities and our communities. And this is one way to engage with those communities with a global lens, and which we have not done in the past. We address that from the local issues, but as Harvey mentioned, all of these issues, these global issues are very local, and we can pinpoint a global connection to anything that we are dealing with locally. And we have the communities that can, whether it is language, whether it is food, as Stephanie mentioned, or, I mean, you could find these things right in our backyards. And that's one opportunity that I think we need to really explore more. What also the pandemic has allowed us to do is really look into different ways of engaging with our partners. So virtual exchanges, you're probably hearing a lot about now, virtual exchanges. And we're all doing that. And what the technology allows us to do is really much, much more impactful and has more reach than what we would have done through the normal mobility channels. We're currently engaged in I was fortunate to participate last year in a Fulbright Germany program on the digitalization of higher education. Who knew then that this is something that we would be right front and center 6 months later? And one of the projects that we were working on, we wanted to work on was virtual exchanges between US universities and German universities. And we started meeting in June and January, but then the pandemic happened. And as a result, we now have 3 institutions in the US, we have 2 institutions in Germany, more than 30 faculty engaged in developing these virtual classes and virtual courses and these global projects that their students are working on, interdisciplinary connections. We would not have been able to do this if it weren't for the pandemic, I mean, realistically. And now we're getting faculty who are excited about participating and faculty who were not involved in our international work before, who are now part of this effort. So this is a tiny example of that, of the impact and the positive opportunities that the pandemic has brought into us. Also, when we look at the one issue that was with us before was the whole issue of access and equity within international education. And now we really, we can make opportunities for all of our students, including the freshmen who usually don't participate in virtual exchange and study abroad or before until they're juniors or seniors. So now they can engage right in the beginning. But even adult students, we could reach all segments of our populations, and it almost like equalizes it from a economic standpoint, because everybody will have a chance at least to get exposed to some of those global literacies and those global competencies that should be part of all of our degrees anyway, and it should be regardless of the discipline. So those are all of these positive things that I think if we are clever in how we capitalize on them and really build them and keep them part of our conversations on our campuses, I think could have a tremendous impact, a positive impact.
I'm going to turn this over in just a minute to Liz, but Harvey, I wanted just to ask you if you could follow up a little bit on that point. I mean, I know we've talked in the past about the challenges and the inequity of opportunity and access in international education. Is that something, I mean, that's something that's just quite systemic in place, it's kind of entrenched. Is that something that can be changed? Do you have confidence that it can be acted upon?
Absolutely, and I think it has been entrenched because our focus historically has been on mobility as frankly the only avenue to achieve these kinds of desirable experiences. Let us note that fewer than 5% of US college students participate in education abroad, all right? What happens to the other 95%? And I argue that as we move deeper into the 21st century, the imperative for this kind of education will only grow. And I think that the imperative for institutions, for colleges and universities to be engaged in delivering this education will also grow as a number of institutions fall by the wayside and colleges and universities begin to pay more attention to the kind of educational experiences that they provide that would help them to become, if you will, more attractive. But I think students also recognize that they want to have this kind of education themselves. I remember, for example, a few years ago, visiting the University of Rhode Island, which sponsors the International Engineering Program. And this is effectively a pathway program that packages global learning through additional study of a foreign language. So you end up actually earning a degree in a foreign language, Spanish or German or French or Chinese, with study abroad and internship abroad and engagement with courses with a global focus. And I remember a student saying to me, just in a very blunt way, he said, you know, I left Chicago and came here because of this program, and the kind of learning experiences it would afford me. So I think that we have an opportunity to transcend the traditional conservatism that we find on our campuses and rally around, if you will, the realities that we face in terms of the global experiences that we have to engage with as a human species, and find ways to align the educational experiences that we afford our students with these realities. And in so doing, the issue of access goes away, because these are experiences that would be afforded to all students. It would be part of what it means to have a college experience.
And Harvey, I would add one critical factor to this, is that I think while everything you said was true a year ago, now because of the pandemic and because there was success with this, people actually no longer see this as the second tier experience, but instead have seen that now it has become not only possible, but a desirable option. And we're hearing things now that I would have never heard from faculty and students before, because we had to do virtual internships. A year ago, nobody wanted to do a virtual internship because it was less than the real thing perceived as such. Now that they did it and realized it was pretty cool and it worked and it was a significant learning experience, I think it's now going to end up being something in sort of the regular set of offerings of things, and so there's an acceptance for that, which I think is what also sort of fundamentally changes this access issue, is that it's no longer something of a real versus virtual. I think they're going to be alongside each other as just different choices to that. And Stephanie, I mean, this is really your area of expertise in this.
Well, I would say,
Stephanie, I'm sorry, can I just?
No, I understand.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let's freeze this idea, because I really want to talk about this, and particularly I want to talk about it because I think a lot of people who've tuned in today are probably looking for actionable ways. It's fine and it's great for us to talk in sort of broad terms about this, but I think it would be really great to talk about what are some things that we might do within the field that could help, where places to start. And so we're going to take a brief break right now, and I'm going to bring in my colleague Liz for a short interview with our sponsor, and then we'll return and keep up with this exciting conversation, and also take some of your questions from the audience. And so please keep sending those in and posting them in the Q&A box. And so, and Liz, I'll turn it over to you. And if my colleagues, fellow panelists can mute themselves, that would be great.
Hey, Karen. This has been a really great conversation so far. And so I'm here today with Eric Harrell, who is CEO at Keystone Academic Solutions. Thank you for being here today, Eric. I hope you're doing well.
Great to be here. I'm doing well. Doing well.
Good. Yes. So as Karen mentioned at the outset, so many things have changed about higher education, and we've spent the past 25 minutes hearing about those changes in the international context. And I believe it was Cheryl who called this a really important turning point. So I'm going to put that question to you. What do you think some of the big shifts will be happening as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously been a very interesting discussion, and a theme that came up, of course, towards the end was more about digitization of education. And I think that's probably the two biggest trends that we see. And we have a perspective on this at Keystone, because we're helping universities recruit students. We have a digital platform, and we have on our platform, we have more than 55,000 programs, and we're helping basically students find the right program for them. And we have 6 million students coming to our websites around the world every month. So we have a real perspective on trends with universities, trends with students. And I think the digitization is a really big one for us. And we really see it in really two ways. One, with regard to recruiting, how universities are approaching recruiting now. And two, looking at online programs. And of course, we have a perspective there, because, as I said, we're working with universities on a daily basis. But the broader theme is really digitization. And I think when it comes to online recruiting and that approach, the traditional method of recruiting students has been going to student fairs hosting students on campus, things like that. But with COVID-19, that's not possible. And so what we've seen is this real ramp up among universities to really explore digital means of recruiting students. So you're seeing webinars, you're seeing much greater use of social media, you're seeing virtual fairs. And in our world, we're seeing much greater focus on online marketing and using platforms like ourselves. I mean, the advantage, of course, of platforms like ours, we have global reach, is really reach. We can, a university that's looking to recruit students around the world can reach students where they are. I mean, students today are online. So they can reach the students where they are, which is online. It's incredibly scalable. You can extend and recruit in multiple places around the world. And the beauty of course, of online channels is you can test, you can iterate, and you can optimize, and then scale. So I think that's one big trend that we see is a step change because of COVID-19. Is this much greater, we don't have a choice because the offline ways of recruiting are off the table at the moment. And so I think there's been a real increase in the sophistication of how universities are approaching, marketing. And then when it comes to online programs, I think that's a really interesting trend that we see. We see that in our traffic and student interest. I mean, like 75% of our students, we do these student polls. We have 6 million students come to our websites every month. So we've been doing student polls. And there's 75% of our students are interested in online learning, online programs, which I think is quite interesting. I think it's quite a change from, say, a year ago. But of course, what's happened with the pandemic, and this is a theme that was talked about before, is that universities have had to step up and take a crash course in many cases on, on this whole online learning thing. And that means not only professors having to learn how to teach online, but also create lots of content. So the table really is set, I think, for the proliferation of online learning and online programs. And I think what's exciting is to see how online programs can now, and this is a point that was made earlier, can really be a legitimate parallel track for people. And I think it's exciting for universities because it's a way to open up a new segment, new customer segment. You have the traditional on-campus experience, and that's for certain people. But you have a lot of people in this world who, because of family reasons, because of jobs, are not able to travel and be on campus. And of course, the thing about online is typically, we know it's a lower price point. So all of a sudden, it's accessible to a much broader array of students. I think that's an exciting thing for universities because I think it offers up new revenue sources. I think it's exciting because it's a way for them to extend their brand beyond the on-campus, limitations of on-campus. But I think it's also very exciting, and this is a point that was made, I think, very well with the panel, is it all of a sudden gives many more students around the world access to high-quality education through online means. So I think those are, I think, two of the biggest trends. Mm-hmm. I mean, we see that on campus is still, in terms of universities, there's still a lot of focus on campus, but we're seeing a tremendous increase in focus on online programs from universities.
Mm-hmm. So there's a great question that's come into the Q&A box that I thought would be worth putting to you, and that's we've been talking about global learning, and what the question is about: what innovations might come out of this particular moment of disruption? What opportunities might there be? So I'm curious, either in this particular moment or down the line in the near term, if you have thoughts on that.
Well, I think this was something that was taken up by the panel, and I've already talked about the marketing side of things and online marketing innovation there. But I think the point that was made about virtual internships, I think that's or virtual seminars and virtual So I think the key thing there is I think it's opening people's eyes to the potential of doing things in a more virtual, digital way. And I think that's going to create a new stage of innovation, I think, in higher education. And, the point was made that what 5% of students, US students, go overseas. I think this is going to be great because it's going to make international and international education much more accessible to American students. And I think the point that was made on the panel, which I thought was fantastic, is now more than ever, it's super important that we have those, we have international cooperation. You know, climate change is something that we need to tackle together, you know, across the world. And so I think this could be, I think, a really step change here, a big event here, I think, in terms of internationalization, because people now see virtual education, online education, cooperation in virtual means possible. So I think that's an exciting sort of trend.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Those are some really thoughtful answers. And I'd like to kick this back to Karen. Thank you for being here. And thanks very much again to Keystone Academic Solutions.
My pleasure. Great to be here. Thanks.
Back to you, Karen.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks, Eric. That was really interesting. So Stephanie, I stepped on your toes when we were going into this part of it. So I wanted to let you make your point, but I also wanted to pose something to you that I know I've been thinking about a lot in my coverage over the last 6 or 8 months, which is the digital divide. You know, we know that it exists. We know it exists here in the US, and we certainly know that it exists for the students that we would like to serve around the country. And so when we think about these alternative, perhaps virtual means of international education, how do we take into account the digital divide, or are we just gonna change the access and equity question to sort of a different mode?
Right. Thank you for asking about that, because that is kind of where I was going, where Cheryl kindly said, oh, you know, Stephanie, like, this is your thing these days. Yes, I'm passionate, and I'm a huge cheerleader and a promoter of COIL and virtual exchange. But in that work, it's only helped me to see how it causes us as leaders, as faculty, as fellow students, as peers, to have a more intimate understanding of a deeper layer of inequity in our society and in societies around the world. And when we think about the digital divide, we're usually thinking mostly in terms of just, I need Wi-Fi and I need the hardware and I need the software. Yes, I'm having meetings with my colleagues around the world where they are having to drive to a local mall to access highway. And those are the high-level administrators in the institutions. And yes, some of my colleagues have access to Zoom and others don't. And there are issues with information privacy and FERPA and GDPR and all of that. But then there's a deeper layer, which is, do I turn my camera on or not in my home? Because I may or may not want my colleagues or my peers to see what's happening, or I can't get a quiet space in my home to be able to work and communicate. There are a whole raft of new access and equity issues. And I think when we think are futuring international education, we can start to think about, we can go back, we can think about the Tennessee Valley Authority, and we can imagine what are the new utilities that don't exist? Like, is Zoom and is Teams or Google Docs a new utility, right? That everyone should have the right to access and to use free of charge. We have to think about a new addition to the Bill of Rights in terms of privacy and freedom of speech and monitoring the use of the data that is produced, all of these data packets that are flying through the air, and the recordings that we make. What are we doing with those? So there's even a divide around the storage and the use of information. These do need to be dealt with. And I would say the last thing is that when we think about access and making our campuses a welcoming place for international students and domestic students, we are thinking about providing new ways to communicate with our students, new on-ramps into our communities, making our communities more welcome. But when it comes to this hybrid reality that we're living in, we actually have to truly meet our students where they are by making sure that they have the basic tools to connect with the institution and with our partners, which means we have to think about providing hardware, software, Wi-Fi access, just like we would provide access to the library or access to safety or a dorm. That's part of being able to make all these amazing things that we're talking about with the virtual space happen.
If I may, I think I agree. And I think the key here is to really make sure that we're not just trying to band-aid the existing model to this new reality that we have to fix. I think we really need to start from a clean sheet of paper on redesigning this new, what this going to look like. And what we went through in our, since March actually is an example. And, when we all took an extra week to switch to remote, it was really band-aiding. But then over the summer, all of our faculty were diligently working to really redesign their courses for an online delivery. The same kind of concept has to be applied here to really allow for these realities that exist that have to be adapted. And we're not talking about an either or between, and I was looking at the discussion, an either or, either the virtual or study abroad. I think it can be both. It is an and discussion, but the and has to be in this new world, in this context that takes into consideration these realities that exist. And if we are serious about the equity, the access that we have been talking about, we have to take them into consideration. And it's gonna require a completely different business model that does not exist currently. So we have to work collectively within the construct of our institutions to really think of how do we deliver this and make this part of our education, that we owe it to our students who are coming to us to be, global citizens, competitive in the world after and be able to be able to adapt. How do we do it within what our financial structures?
I'd like to quickly build on what Ahmed just shared by offering 5 quick strategies that practically any institution can employ to begin engaging with this issue in a more serious and substantive way. I would say that the very first is that in recognizing that this redesigning that Ahmed talked about is actually part of what I happen to think is an emerging paradigm for how higher education is done and delivered. And, as international educators, I think that we need to be at the table helping to design what this new paradigm looks like. And of course, that begins with strategic planning. And it should be both institutional strategic planning, but also strategic planning focused on international education. And by the way, strategic planning doesn't cost anything. So cost is a non-issue here. But I think, and I would hope that part of this strategic planning, we're also able to make a commitment to not only continue with the development of learning outcomes, but to begin to talk about articulating global learning outcomes. And that needs to happen at the level of courses, at the level of majors, at the level of academic departments, and even at the level of the institution itself. The third, I would say, is that we need to create opportunities for students to be engaged in research activity that are focused on the grand global challenges that we face. Research universities and honors programs tend to do that as a matter of course. But it is not always true that students, as many students as we would think, get these opportunities to engage in research, and to the extent that we can try to broaden that and make it more democratic if possible, and recognizing that many institutions are not set up to do a whole lot of research, but recognizing the value of this activity and to the extent possible, facilitate opportunities for students to do this, I think it would be a good thing. And in fact, there are a number of institutions that are already doing this kind of thing. I very much wish and hope that more institutions would see the value in doing this. The fourth strategy would be to partner with institutions abroad in terms of study, but also in terms of research. And institutions can engage in developing dual degree programs, for example, where you can earn a master's degree in the same amount of time, or you can earn 2 master's degrees in the same amount of time that it would take to earn one, but you're able to benefit from the expertise and from the experiences that may exist at an institution far away from home. And then finally, the importance of recognizing that faculty are the principal agents in advancing global learning and campus internationalization, and work closely with them to support them by helping them to acquire this expertise by providing international teaching and research opportunities for them, but also to find ways to reward faculty for engaging in this work. And I think if we do this kind of, if we adopt this approach, I think we will be well on our way to institutionalizing global learning and campus internationalization, as opposed to simply pursuing it as the latest fad.
That was a great segue, Harvey. One of the questions that of many good questions that are in the queue is from Joseph Hoff, and he asks, when we talk about things like internationalizing the curriculum, internationalizing courses, internationalizing at home, it's all well and good for the international office to say that, but it's necessary to have faculty buy-in. You mentioned rewarding faculty for their sort of collaboration, but I wonder, for all of you, do you have strategies for working with faculty, for bringing them in and making them feel invested in this kind of work too?
Yeah, I don't know who wants to. I think I'm sure we all have different ways to do this, but I think that at the heart of it is understanding, I think, fundamentally, that there is not a one-size-fits-all approach, that it has to be something that sort of emanates out of what that institution is about. And I think about our strategic plan and our internationalization plan at Lehigh is very specific to Lehigh, and it's very specific to our history, our culture, our programs, and who we are to that. And it is really appropriate for us, but it wouldn't work at Wayne State. And I wouldn't pretend that it would be. Maybe some of the things we're doing might, but the particulars of it, we're just really different kind of institutions. And I think it comes back to, again, moving away from this kind of program-centered approach, but talking about it in terms of where it's sort of fundamentally related to what the institution is about, your mission, and how you kind of execute on that mission, and that brings it back to things that are really relevant. I'm going to add one other piece to it, and so in terms of the very particulars, we involve faculty in many ways. One of the critical is a faculty committee on global affairs, which is essentially kind of, again, I'm sure lots of people have something similar, kind of an advisory group. But what I'm finding really key with that group is that oftentimes our faculty are out of step, are just, because they're not reading all the same things that we're reading in terms of the trends and what's happening in internationalization, that some of the pieces that we know are just not things that are sort of front of mind in terms of developments or trends or issues there. And so that committee has been really critical in terms of kind of helping with keeping some of those trend issues there front of line. And this year, the chair of our faculty committee is using the entire year with the advisory group to be essentially doing a kind of risk analysis of looking at what's happening globally in terms of sort of different regions, areas that we're engaged, some of our practice, to help do a kind of post-COVID risk analysis, so that they're now getting in and looking at some of the same kind of literature that we're reading, some of the trend data, and trying to sort of help aggregate this also around what they know is happening within their own disciplines and work within their college. And I'm actually really quite excited about the process, because I think it's getting us to doing exactly what I think is at the heart of that question, of doing something that is looking at what are the things that are happening, how Lehigh is going to come out of this, what are we doing institutionally to try to innovate out of that, how is this changing some of the assumptions that we had made around this, and doing it in this really kind of strategic fashion, so that when we come out, we can say, here's where the opportunity is, and here's what the investment would be, here's what we back away from, how do we do this. I think in doing that too, it's the faculty, to Hardy's good point on this, our faculty will be then well ready to help kind of take that leadership there to this, because they've been in that discussion with us.
I agree. I think it has to be within the structure and the culture of your institution. It varies from one institution to another. And for us, what works, you really have to work with the deans. You have to talk to the chairs. You have to reach the faculty directly, because they, you cannot count on, if you told the dean that things are going to necessarily trickle down to them. But more importantly, I think the transparency about your objectives and what you are trying to accomplish and how you are supporting them. At the end of the day, I think the faculty are who are going to drive the work. We can facilitate, we can bring resources, we can host people and send people overseas, but it's the faculty who are going to teach and going to make this stick. And it's, I think, our roles as administrators in this effort is really to give them all those resources and show them and help them making the connection, and allow them to really think creatively. And and I think that's the key, because they have what it takes, and I think they are able to come up with some innovative ideas. And I think it's just creating that trust factor, so it's organic. It's not gonna push down from above or through a strategic plan or anything. It's like they have to come up with the ideas, and for us, I mean, I know what's happening now. They are, I mean, I'm very pleased and very appreciative of what's coming out of their work.
Two quick examples of how we can more effectively work with faculty. I have, as a chief, when I used to be a chief international officer, I would sponsor workshops for faculty on the Fulbright program. And I would do them myself. I would not delegate this to other parties. And I would involve faculty who have received Fulbrights in the past so that they can talk about their own personal experiences. But what I've recognized over the past 15, 20 years is that many faculty have no idea as to how easy it is to get a Fulbright fellowship. 1 in 3 Fulbright applications is funded every year. And so the odds are really great, much better than getting an NSF or an NIH grant or something of the sort. So Fulbright programs where they can pursue international teaching and or research opportunities. And the second strategy I've used is by publishing a magazine, not a newsletter, but a magazine where I have tried to feature the work of faculty who are already engaged in internationalizing teaching and research activity. And this is really about them and to inspire faculty to engage in this work, to collaborate with their counterparts around the world to do this kind of thing. And I've always gotten very positive feedback about this initiative. So
I think it's got to go also a layer deeper, and I know, Harvey, you've led this conversation on your campus. I've been part of it sometimes. It's been an honor. It's got to be an epistemological conversation.
yes.
How is knowledge gathered? How is it produced? And how is it applied within the local context, but also the local being situated within the national, international, regional, global, right? And that has to do with teaching, research, service, career preparation, all of it, right? It's got to be, how do we do this in our discipline? And then it becomes, as Cheryl was saying, not one size fits all in terms of the discipline, in terms of undergraduate versus graduate, or even dual enrollment, or even continuing studies. And as Ahmed was saying, it's also not one size fits all in terms of strategic planning, and how the institution is going to kind of provide a more relevant and effective output in terms of teaching, leadership, research, service, career preparation.
Let me quickly, we're amazingly, we're quickly running out of time here, but let me combine sort of two questions that kind of are getting at two sides of this same issue. One is, somebody said in the Q&A box, look, we still, people still, our students still think of virtual exchange as second class, as second best. Many of them are holding out for the quote unquote real thing. And so how do you sort of change that historic mindset? And then somebody else said, are we writing off mobility? Are we writing off study abroad? And so how do you do something, how do you sort of strike the right balance so that you are both investing in this and getting people excited about this sort of new opportunity that perhaps they've not thought about as much in the past, but how do you keep mobility as a piece of this conversation?
My quick reaction is that from my experience, engagement in the work of internationalization has to be intentional. You know, if you do it, you know, if you do it as a one-off kind of thing, it tends not to grow. It tends not to evolve in a strategic way, and you end up with issues around access and all of those kinds of challenges. So I think the question about writing off education abroad, not at all. I think of what we are talking about as actually growing the pie. You know, for a long time, for example, institutions focused on the traditional semester abroad or the year abroad. Well, over the past 5-8 years, more and more students have been wanting to engage in short-term faculty-led programs. Well, should we take the position that, well, this isn't quite as good as spending a semester abroad? You know, no, we say we support faculty in doing this because it enriches the courses that they offer, and it provides opportunities to students that they might otherwise never ever acquire. So we're growing the pie.
And I gotta say that as amazing as it is to see students' engagement and excitement and transformation in COIL and virtual exchange, it's even more exciting to see the faculty experience, because they are having that same experience. It starts with faculty. They are making a relationship with someone on the other part of the world. They are being inspired. They're learning about how education is happening in other parts of the world and creating new knowledge through that partnership. And so I think if we really want to get to the students, we have to go to the faculty first, supporting them, engaging them, investing in them.
And I think, you know, let's take an example of maybe getting a freshman. Freshmen usually will not go on a study abroad or a semester abroad right when they start. But what if that student got a taste of a global experience through a class project with someone in another country, in China or in the Middle East or in Europe, and that plants the seed for them. So when they are a junior, they are excited, they're thrilled, they are starting to plan for their study abroad experience from their first semester on campus. So that's how we need to think of it. And then from a faculty standpoint, how can we get the faculty to really do it seamlessly without making almost a big deal out of it? So that your projects, for example, can they include a small component that has that connection, that global connection, and give the students that exposure and show them how valuable it can be and how comparable to something, I mean, some other experiences it can be. And then let the courses and the experiences speak for themselves instead of us trying to convince them about it.
Oh, sorry, Cheryl.
I would just say, I think at the, just sort of a last couple thoughts, I think at the end of the day, when we come out of this, it is going to be a both end. I think that we will see mobility return in some form or another. I think the difference is going to be that it'll be pushing the discussion we were already starting to have prior to the pandemic about intentionality of travel just for the sake of travel. And so I think I'm going to be optimistic we'll see a higher quality piece. But I think that this is really, in terms though of so the future then of the virtual component, I think the real aspect to that though will be taking full advantage of what are the unique aspects of things that can happen virtually that can't happen in person to that. And I was reminded of that this morning. I was in a Zoom call with a group of students who were to be part of an exchange program we do with Japan, couldn't do it, been doing some creative virtual piece. And the thing that I heard about from the students as they were talking about what they liked most about the virtual was the aspect for intimate conversations with the kinds of thought leaders, influential people they couldn't have had otherwise. And in short, the students were picking out those parts to the program that were those things that could only happen virtually that made it better. And I think that's the kind of intentionality that everyone here has been talking about. And I think ultimately why we will see both become sort of standard as part of the portfolio that we are all making available.
Great. Well, Cheryl, I think that's actually a great note to conclude on. So I want to thank everyone in the audience for all of your questions. And I really apologize for not being able to get to them all. But please know that we do read them all. And speaking for myself, they really do inform my coverage. And so I really appreciate it. I also want to say thank you to Keystone Academic Solutions for underwriting today's presentations. We really appreciate their support. And then I want to thank my panelists for this really exciting and illuminating discussion. It's really been fascinating. So thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedules. And just a reminder to everybody listening here, we're recording this and we will be sending you a copy and also including some of the resources that have come up in the Q&A and people have been asking about. They will be included as well. So thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.